The first time I broke one of the rules, I learned that the ocean can watch you back, down here 7 miles below the surface. Light isn't just absent, it's devoured. The walls of our station hum like something alive, and the pressure outside could crush steel like paper. They told me there were 11 rules we had to follow to stay sane and human. At first I thought it was a psychological routine, a way to keep us alert in the endless dark. But when I forgot Rule 3 for just a few minutes, something crawled into my dreams and tried to open my eyes for me. I didn't think the rules mattered until the second night. That's when I first noticed the breathing. It wasn't mine, and it wasn't coming from any vent. Down here, sound bends and echoes until you start hearing things that shouldn't exist. But this was different. It came in slow waves, steady and human, and it grew louder every time I blinked. Rule 1. Never fall asleep, unless someone is watching you. I thought it was paranoia, the kind that builds up after long shifts underwater. But then Carter fell asleep during his watch and never woke up. The official report called it sudden pressure trauma. That's what they always said when they couldn't explain something. But when I saw the footage from the lab cameras, his body didn't burst. It just stopped moving, like the water had frozen him from the inside out. His eyes were open, wide and glassy, staring at something behind the lens. We couldn't see it, but the reflection on the glass showed a faint shimmer, almost like a ripple of light, shaped like a face. After Carter's death, the captain enforced the watch rotation. None of us were allowed to sleep alone. There were only 6 of us left. Me, the captain, Dr. Harlow, Singh, Reyes, and Monroe. And the night stretched on forever. When your entire world is a steel tube surrounded by blackness, the difference between day and night disappears. You just count your hours by the hum of the oxygen pumps and the flicker of the monitors. The deeper we stayed, the more that hum started sounding like breathing. Dr. Harlow tried to keep us calm. She said the isolation was playing tricks on our minds. Shared delusions, she called it. But she was the one who added the 11 rules to the briefing wall, written in red ink like commandments. She said they came from the previous research crew, the ones who disappeared during Deep Trench Mission 12. Nobody ever found their remains, only a partially flooded log room with those rules carved into the metal desk. None of us asked how she got them. The first time I tried to sleep after Carter's death, I asked Reyes to watch me. He joked that I snored like a dying whale, trying to lighten the mood, but I could see the fear in his eyes. We both pretended not to hear the faint tapping from the observation window. He told me it was the current shifting debris, but I'd been stationed here long enough to know that nothing moves like that at this depth. It's too cold, too still. When I woke up, Reyes wasn't in the chair anymore. For a moment, I thought he'd gone to grab food, but the seat was still warm. The observation window, however, was open. Not fully, but unsealed, just enough for condensation to trail down the glass, like fingerprints. I followed them to the airlock, where the red indicator light blinked steadily. It was the same signal we used when someone exited the station. But the log showed no authorization, no suit usage, nothing. Just an open lock, and the faint smell of salt water inside. We found Reyes 6 hours later. His body drifted just outside the outer ring, suspended in perfect stillness. His helmet was intact, no visible breach, but his visor was fogged from the inside, and when we pulled him in, the interior of his suit was bone dry. Dr. Harlow said we couldn't send him topside. Decomposition risk, she said, but really we all knew why. His eyes were still open, and his pupils were reflecting that same faint shimmer Carter's had. After that, nobody volunteered for watch duty. The captain had to assign pairs. I was with Monroe most nights. She was younger, a robotics engineer, who joined for the pay bonus, not the science. She kept her comms connected even during rest periods. Said she didn't like the silence. Once, during her shift, I woke to hear her whispering into the headset. She swore she heard someone breathing with her, even though I was right there, wide awake. The strange thing was, I heard it too, only it wasn't coming through the headset. It was coming from under the floor. The sound grew worse over the following days. Sometimes it was faint, like a sigh through the pipes. Other times it was deep and ragged, as if something was trying to imitate us. Singh placed motion sensors along the corridor, but every time the sound started they malfunctioned. No readings, no movement, just a static surge and the faint metallic taste of ozone in the air. We tried sleeping in shifts, always with someone awake, but exhaustion started breaking us down. 3 nights later, Monroe broke the rule. She didn't mean to. We were both sitting in the lab, her reviewing footage, me staring at nothing. She leaned back for just a second, said she was resting her eyes. I remember thinking, I'll wake her in a minute. I didn't. When I turned to check on her, she was slumped sideways, eyes closed, lips trembling. I called her name. No response. I shook her, and her body jerked like she'd been shocked. She opened her eyes wide, gasped, and started screaming. We restrained her in the infirmary, but she never made sense again. The captain ordered the tapes pulled, and what we saw made all of us silent. At the moment Monroe fell asleep, the temperature in the lab dropped 2 degrees. The light dimmed for less than a second, then something moved behind her. It wasn't clear, more like a distortion in the air, a shape outlined by the glow of the monitors. When it passed over her, her heart monitor spiked to 200. For 5 whole minutes, her reflection in the glass was smiling, even though her real face wasn't. Harlow stopped the experiment schedule after that. We shut down all external research and focused only on maintaining life support. But there was one thing she didn't tell the rest of the crew: the deeper logs from Mission 12. I found them one night, hidden behind encrypted files on the comms drive. The recordings were garbled, but a few words came through. If they sleep alone, they dream of the surface, and something dreams back. That's when I realized the shimmer wasn't light. It was movement. Something outside the station was watching us through the glass. That night, I tried to test it. I left my bunk camera recording while I pretended to sleep. My eyes stayed half open, unfocused. After 30 minutes, the oxygen monitor began to pulse, like it was syncing to my breathing. Then just before I blinked, I saw a pale outline hover near the viewport. It looked almost human, but its eyes were too wide, its smile too calm. It leaned close to the glass, as if listening, then whispered something I couldn't hear. When I blinked again, it was gone, and the recording cut off in static. The captain ordered lockdown. We sealed the hatches, rerouted power, and turned off every external light to stop attracting attention. But it didn't help. The shimmer came closer each night, following the paths of our spotlights, even after they were dark. Singh started mumbling in his sleep, despite the tranquilizers. He kept repeating, "It knows our faces now." The morning we found him missing, his headset was still transmitting, the faint sound of breathing, perfectly matching our own. We should have evacuated then, but Harlow insisted the surface crew wasn't responding. She said transmissions weren't going through, though I think she stopped trying long before that. The rules weren't about sanity anymore, they were about survival. The shimmer outside the glass wasn't leaving, and now, when I closed my eyes, I could see its outline behind my eyelids. I understood then why we had to follow them. Some things down here only exist when you're not looking. By the time we realized that, it was already too late for Monroe. She started whispering in her sleep, repeating the words "eyes open" over and over, until her voice turned hoarse. When I shook her awake, she didn't blink once. Not during the entire conversation. Not even when blood started pooling at the corners of her eyes. That was the night the lights went out for good, and something started moving in the dark, closer than it ever had before. I thought I had understood the shimmer after Monroe, but nothing could prepare me for what came next. That night, I was alone in the lab, running diagnostics on the oxygen systems, when I saw it again, pale, distorted, drifting along the outer hull like it was watching my every move. My hand froze over the controls, and my chest tightened as the cold radiated through the metal floor. Rule 2: never look outside the viewport. When the shimmer appears, I remembered the warning etched in the logs from the previous crew, but curiosity clawed at me in the same way the darkness clawed at the station walls. I tried to work without looking, pretending my eyes were fixed on the instruments. But the shimmer moved in rhythm with my breathing. Every time I blinked toward it, even slightly, it twisted, as if reacting to the smallest hint of attention. Carter's and Monroe's incidents replayed in my head. Open eyes, frozen bodies, and that same impossible reflection. I told myself this was stress, the isolation, but deep down I knew it was something else. Something sentient, something patient, waiting for the perfect moment to slip past our rules. By the time I noticed Dr. Harlow approaching, the shimmer had shifted position, now hovering near the engineering viewport at the far end of the lab. Her footsteps were careful, deliberate, but they didn't mask the tension that had built between us since Monroe. "Do not look at it," she whispered, almost like speaking louder would summon it faster. I nodded, trying not to betray my panic, but the reflection in the polished steel console made me flinch. The shimmer seemed to pulse, mirroring the flicker of my heart rate, almost taunting me into glancing. I spent hours calibrating the internal lights, using every trick I knew to distract myself from the dark outside. The shimmer moved along the curvature of the station, following shadows even though the lights were fixed. Singh and Reyes were in their quarters, both under heavy sedation, and the hum of the life support systems was the only reassurance I had. Yet, I could feel it watching, always aware of my gaze, anticipating even the briefest lapse. The logs from Mission 12 explicitly warned that any glance could invite it in, but no one ever described the terror of waiting for it to arrive. That is when I heard the whisper. Not the faint one from the previous nights, but a deliberate voice, almost human, murmuring from the viewport's direction. I didn't look, gripping the edge of the console and muttering prayers I didn't believe in. The voice repeated, growing louder, closer, almost coaxing me. I felt it slide along my skin, a cold, wet presence, like a hand grazing my spine without touching me. I realized, with a chill that made my teeth ache, that the shimmer didn't just observe, it communicated, it tested, and it knew I wanted to see it. Dr. Harlow stayed with me for hours, and we talked in whispers, avoiding any mention of what we could see outside. Her voice kept me grounded, though I could feel her own tension radiating through her calm. We discussed the oxygen supply, the power fluctuations, and any possible mechanical explanations for the shimmer, all while our hearts raced. But even as we spoke, the ambient lights flickered in rhythm with something outside, and the shimmer's outline shifted ever so slightly. It wasn't static, it was alive in ways that defied physics, moving as though it had a mind and intent. Eventually, fatigue overtook me. My vision blurred, my hands shook, and I started to feel the temptation of sleep. That's when the whispering changed, forming words I could almost comprehend. "Look." Only once, I fought it, turning my attention back to the monitors, to the instruments, to anything but the viewport. But the shimmer had anticipated me. It had bent the light inside the lab to create a pale reflection on the glass panels, so I couldn't tell what was real and what was outside. I understood then why Rule 2 existed. It was designed to protect not just the body but the mind. Hours passed, my notebooks filled with frantic scrawls, detailing every movement, every flicker, every heartbeat, but the shimmer never left. At one point, I heard Monroe's voice, or at least something mimicking it, repeating a warning I hadn't remembered. The echo of her words reverberated through the station. "Do not look, do not look, do not look." I realized the shimmer could copy sounds, personalities, even memories. It wasn't just a predator, it was a manipulator, learning everything about us to make us break the rules ourselves. When dawn, or what we called dawn in our isolated trench station, finally approached, I was physically exhausted and mentally frayed. I had spent the night monitoring every sensor and adjusting every blind, keeping my eyes strictly on the panels, but the shimmer had moved, repositioned itself closer, and I noticed the faint outline of a hand pressed against the outer hull. It wasn't my imagination. The curvature of the viewport distorted it just enough to unsettle me, yet it was unmistakably human-shaped. My fingers trembled over the controls as I calculated the odds of surviving another night. By mid-morning, Singh and Reyes had awakened, groggy from sedation, and I explained the night's events. Neither of them reacted rationally. They were too drained to comprehend the magnitude of the shimmer. Dr. Harlow urged caution, reminding us to stick to the rules and avoid confrontation. But we all knew what that meant. The shimmer would continue observing, learning, waiting for someone to falter. The pressure inside the station felt heavier now, every steel panel humming like it carried the heartbeat of whatever was outside. That afternoon, I attempted to recalibrate the viewport sensors, carefully scanning for distortions, anything that might indicate the shimmer's position. But the readings were inconsistent, fluctuating like static, as though the shimmer could manipulate the instruments themselves. It wasn't merely a creature, it was an intelligence, a force that warped perception. The logs from previous missions warned us not to engage, not to observe, yet here I was, trapped between duty and survival, and the memory of Monroe's frozen eyes haunted every blink. As night fell again, the shimmer returned in full, moving with precision along the outer hull. I couldn't look at it directly, that much was clear, but it was impossible to ignore. Its presence filled the station like a weight pressing on my chest. I whispered to myself, I won't look, yet every flicker of reflected light in the lab teased me. It felt alive in ways that made me question reality, bending light, shadows, and my own perception. I realized then that Rule 2, never look outside the viewport, when the shimmer appears, wasn't just advice, it was a lifeline. The first scream came just before midnight, not from the shimmer, but from Carter's old bunk, an old recording accidentally left running. The audio played back distorted, almost like it was being filtered through the shimmer's own perception. The sound carried through the station, amplified by the metal walls, making my ears ring. Dr. Harlow shushed me, pulling me away from the viewport, and reminding me of the rule. Even in the safety of the lab, the station itself felt compromised, like the shimmer had extended beyond the glass and into our minds. I spent the remainder of the night pacing, checking instruments, adjusting cameras, and making sure no one fell asleep near a viewport. The shimmer didn't leave, it only shifted patiently, deliberately, as though it knew exactly when to strike. By dawn, the strain was unbearable. We were awake, but we were also prisoners of the rules and of the entity that enforced them. My gaze never left the monitors, my fingers never left the control panels, yet I could feel it, just outside, waiting, mimicking, preparing for the next inevitable mistake. And as the faint lights of the lab flickered one final time, I realized we were all playing a dangerous game. The shimmer wasn't just observing, it was testing, learning which of us would falter first, which of us would break Rule 2, and I knew deep down that when someone did, there would be no going back. By the third night after Singh and Reyes woke, exhaustion had made every shadow in the station feel alive. My eyes ached, and every fiber of my being begged me to shut down the lights and rest. But I knew the consequences. Rule 3, never turn off the interior lights, even if the station feels empty. I remembered the warning clearly, scribbled in Dr. Harlow's encrypted notes. Darkness doesn't just hide the shimmer, it gives it power. Yet staring at the monitors, I almost convinced myself I could get away with a brief blackout, just to soothe my throbbing temples. I had barely tilted the switch when the station seemed to exhale around me. The fluorescent glow of the panels dimmed, leaving the hallways suffused in a creeping, unnatural shadow. I froze. The shimmer was there. Not outside, not in the viewport, but in the darkness between the consoles. A pale distortion crawling along the edges of my vision. I spun back to the lights and restored them, feeling the cold relief flood through the lab. The entity didn't retreat entirely. Its presence lingered, just enough to remind me that even a momentary lapse could be fatal. Dr. Harlow caught me fiddling with the switches. "Do you want it to notice you?" she asked, her voice low, more fear than anger. I shook my head, but the truth was, I had wanted it to vanish, if only for a few seconds. We were confined, trapped in metal and pressure, and the temptation to shut out the darkness was unbearable. Every night the shimmer adjusted its pace, learned our routines, and tested how long we could ignore it. Even the hum of the life support systems seemed to pulse in sync with its patience, each cycle a countdown to potential disaster. I began noticing small changes that I hadn't before. The lights flickered, not due to the electrical system, but in patterns, like signals. Sometimes, the shimmer's presence could be traced by subtle variations in illumination. A hallway lamp dimming slightly, a panel flicker, a reflection bending unnaturally. We tried documenting everything, but the logs themselves became unreliable, as if the station resisted being observed. Monroe's recordings from the previous missions, the same ones Harlow had shown us, confirmed this. The shimmer could manipulate not only the physical environment, but also the technology we trusted to survive. Singh suggested using infrared cameras to see in the dark, reasoning that if the lights failed, at least we'd have a backup. I agreed, though the last thing I wanted was more equipment running or screens adding more stimuli. But when we powered them on, we saw it. The shimmer wasn't confined to the viewport. It stretched through the air, shaping itself in the darkened hallways, a mass that flickered and distorted, impossible to define. Its presence was immediate, undeniable, and it seemed to whisper something with every pulse of light. We tried ignoring it. Dr. Harlow insisted. We moved from room to room without glancing at the hallways, as if our own focus could repel it. But when lights flickered, even for a second, it reacted. The shimmer would appear closer, just behind the doors we were vacating, and its faint, warped reflection would hover there for minutes. Reyes claimed he saw shapes moving in corners that didn't exist, but when we turned to check, the areas were empty. The station, normally precise and silent, became a trap, a labyrinth of shadows and rules we couldn't bend without consequence. By the fourth night, panic started taking its toll. Even brief eye closures became dangerous, the shimmer adapting to our habits. My hands shook as I monitored oxygen levels, life support, and every camera feed simultaneously. I felt watched from every angle, as if the station itself had become a living entity feeding off our fear. I realized then that Rule 3 wasn't just about light, it was about control. The shimmer thrived in our hesitation, our lapses, and every moment we tried to impose normalcy on an impossible environment. That night, Monroe attempted to rest in the observation lounge. She claimed she needed a break, said that even brief moments of darkness wouldn't matter if we remained alert. I protested, holding her hands, repeating the rules. But she insisted, "It's just lights, Usman, nothing else." I watched her flick the switch. For a moment, the station went silent, and the glow vanished. Then came the sudden sensation of presence so heavy it pressed down on my chest. The shimmer was there, closer than I'd ever seen it, a warped shadow that twisted reality itself. The monitors began flickering uncontrollably. Red warnings flashed across every system, alerting us to imaginary malfunctions. I ran from console to console trying to regain control, but the shimmer's distortion had seeped into the instruments. Monroe's breathing quickened shallow and panicked, as if she could feel it wrapping around her from all sides. I screamed at her to flip the lights back on, and when she did, a fraction of normality returned. But the station still felt wrong, as though the shimmer had imprinted itself on the walls, waiting for the next opportunity to exploit our fear. By morning, Monroe was silent, her gaze fixed on the far corner of the lab, following a shadow none of us could see. Harlow warned us not to interfere with her, and yet we couldn't stop ourselves from watching. Even as I write this, the memory of her trembling in darkness haunts me. The shimmer had learned that light could contain it temporarily, but it had also learned that we could be tempted, and in those moments of weakness, it grew stronger. The next night, I patrolled the station alone, never letting a single panel go dark. Every flicker, every minor dimming, I treated like a warning, a pulse of danger. The shimmer seemed to mock me, shaping light in impossible angles, bending reflections on the glass, making hallways appear longer than they were. The oppressive awareness of its gaze was suffocating. I realized with cold certainty that ignoring Rule 3 for even a fraction of a second could be fatal, and the shimmer had no mercy for mistakes. And as I sit here, recounting everything, I know the shimmer is still out there, testing, observing, waiting. It has adapted, learned our habits, and grown bolder. Every night, every flicker, is a challenge, and one wrong move, one temptation to plunge the station into darkness, will allow it to strike. The rules are the only thing keeping us alive, and the third one is the most crucial of all. By the fifth night, the shimmer had grown bolder. Its presence wasn't just outside the viewport or lurking in the shadows anymore. It began to mimic voices. I could hear Monroe calling my name from the far corridor, soft and trembling, repeating things I didn't remember saying. Every instinct screamed at me to respond. But the words of the rule echoed in my mind. Rule 4, never speak to the shimmer, even if it imitates someone you know. I forced my jaw to stay tight and moved toward the monitors instead, pretending not to hear the familiar tone that twisted my stomach. The whispers followed me everywhere. Even while monitoring oxygen levels, the shimmer would imitate Carter, Monroe, or even Dr. Harlow's voice, coaxing me toward hallways I knew were empty. Each time I paused, it became louder, insistent, a mockery of our fear. I thought we were prepared. We knew the rule, we understood the consequence, but hearing Monroe's trembling voice call for help while she sat safely in her bunk shook me to the core. My heartbeat pounded, sinking with every syllable, and the temptation to answer almost broke my discipline. Dr. Harlow noticed my hesitation. She leaned over my shoulder and whispered, "It wants you to doubt yourself. Ignore it, always ignore it." But that night, it got smarter. It didn't just imitate voices. It started repeating conversations I'd had hours ago, snippets of arguments, or quiet murmurs, using them to lure me to dark corners. One moment, I'd be checking a monitor. The next I'd hear Reyes whispering my name, saying, "It's okay, come here." Every instinct in my body screamed to respond, but I knew that responding meant inviting the shimmer in. I spent hours pacing the station, repeating Harlow's instructions like a mantra. I ignored every voice, every whisper, even the ones that sounded almost exactly like Monroe or Carter. The shimmer tested my resolve, slipping between rooms, sometimes appearing in the reflection of monitors or panels, but never directly. It was a predator of perception, learning which of us could resist its tricks and which would fall prey. We were alone with it, but it had access to everything, our memories, our fears, our voices. During the early morning, I caught it mimicking me. My own voice repeated instructions I'd given to the team, but warped, slower, sinister. The shimmer had adapted again. It didn't just imitate others, it could imitate me. I froze in the lab, staring at the reflection of my own distorted movements in the monitor glass. I couldn't tell which was real and which was a projection. Every breath became a countdown, every step toward the console a test of will. Speaking even once could give it a foothold inside the station. Reyes panicked when he heard it. From his quarters, he heard Monroe calling, pleading for help. He opened his door and stumbled toward the corridor, calling her name. I grabbed him by the arm, shaking him violently. "Don't respond," I screamed. The shimmer's voice had already enticed him to break the rule. I could see the fear in his eyes as he realized his mistake. But before we could retreat, the monitors showed a faint reflection of something moving behind him in the hallway. We had no idea whether it was Reyes or the shimmer's mimicry. We tried to record everything. Cameras, audio logs, sensor data. Nothing seemed consistent. The shimmer manipulated more than perception. It toyed with reality. Harlow told me, "It isn't human. It doesn't obey physics like we do." And I believed her, because watching the shimmer imitate voices, gestures, even snippets of memories, was terrifying in a way I could never explain. One false word, one whisper in its direction, and it could envelop you, wrap your mind in darkness, and leave your body behind. By midday, we realized another complication. The shimmer wasn't satisfied with imitating. It started responding indirectly, leaving objects moved slightly, panels shifted, instruments distorted. The station itself became a weapon, a conduit for its manipulation. Harlow suggested reinforcing control over lights and locks, but every adjustment seemed to provoke it further. The whispers came back at night, repeating fragments of past mistakes, a constant reminder that disobedience had consequences. That night, Singh almost broke the rule. From the far end of the station, he heard Carter's voice begging for help. "Please, Usman, I need you." Singh froze, a hand raised toward the corridor, ready to answer. I sprinted to him, grabbing his wrist just as he opened his mouth. His eyes were wide, terrified, and I yelled, "Don't speak." He recoiled, trembling. The shimmer's distortion hovered in the darkness beyond the doorway, almost visible through the monitor's dim reflection. We realized the entity had grown impatient. Our hesitation fueled it. "Doctor," Harlow insisted we lock all the hallways except one, keeping every team member within visual range of one another at all times. The shimmer continued to mimic voices, but now its purpose seemed clear. It wanted us isolated, tested, and desperate. Every night we remained awake. Every time the lights were on, every time we ignored the calls, we survived. But the effort was breaking us, one rule at a time, and if even one of us faltered, I couldn't imagine the consequences. By morning, the shimmer had left, or so we thought. Its absence wasn't relief, it was a warning. The air felt heavier, every monitor flickered faintly, and the whispers of imitation echoed faintly in my memory. I realized that Rule 4 wasn't just about ignoring a voice, it was about retaining your mind, your sense of reality, and the fragile barrier that kept the shimmer from controlling us. Every night since, I've repeated the rule in my head, knowing that even a single slip of the tongue could unravel everything we fought to survive. The shimmer had grown smarter, and by the sixth night, even the corridors felt like a maze designed to trap us. Every step outside my assigned station seemed to echo, warped, magnified, as though the darkness itself had a voice warning me to turn back. Rule 5. Never leave your assigned station alone, no matter what you hear. I remembered it clearly as my legs itched to move toward a faint, distant sound. Monroe calling my name again. Or was it the shimmer pretending? The rule was simple, yet the temptation to ignore it gnawed at me relentlessly. It started small, a metallic scrape from the opposite end of the lab, a faint moan, the unmistakable sound of movement that shouldn't exist. My pulse jumped, and I told myself it was nothing. A fault in the station, a trick of acoustics at extreme depth. But the shimmer doesn't wait for reason. It manipulates perception, blurs the line between reality and imagination, and tests our instincts. Leaving my station, even for a second, could mean encountering something I could never survive. Harlow noticed my hesitation and placed a hand on my shoulder, whispering, "Stay put, it will feed on you if you go alone." I nodded, but the sound came again. Monroe's voice, soft, pleading. My mind rebelled, each fiber telling me to move, to check, to rescue. I gripped the edge of my console, forcing myself to breathe, counting silently to stay grounded. Every second I resisted. The shimmer pulsed outside the viewport, a pale distortion of movement that seemed almost human but wasn't. Hours passed, and the sound persisted, teasing me, taunting me, testing my willpower. Even when the lights flickered slightly, my attention snapped back to my instruments, reminding myself that leaving my station could be fatal. I remembered the reports from Mission 12, crew members who had abandoned their posts never returned. Not a trace. The shimmer didn't kill them in a conventional sense. It trapped their perception, twisted their minds, and left their bodies behind. The rule wasn't arbitrary, it was survival. Reyes tried to challenge it that night. He claimed he heard someone crying in the storage bay, a voice that sounded exactly like Carter. I shouted for him to stay, but he darted down the corridor anyway. Moments later, the cameras picked up a distortion, a ripple of pale light sliding along the walls. His monitor feed cut out. When we regained the signal, his chair was empty, and the faint sound of breathing, identical to his own, echoed through the lab. I realized then how merciless the shimmer could be. The station had become a cage. We were trapped in metal tubes 7 miles below the surface, constantly reminded that a single lapse could be our last. I never left my station, not even to use the restroom, relying on Harlow and Singh to rotate nearby. Every sound outside my station became a test, a call to break the rule, and the shimmer learned from every hesitation, every twitch of curiosity, every inch of movement we allowed ourselves. The more it studied us, the bolder it became. I remember that night vividly. The hum of the oxygen pumps synced with the distant distortion, a rhythm that made it impossible to ignore. Harlow whispered that it was feeding on anticipation, on our instinct to move toward danger. I gripped the console, sweat dripping down my temples, as Monroe's voice called again, now more insistent, more desperate. I had to repeat the rule in my head like a mantra, each syllable a lifeline tethering me to reality. Then came the lights, not the flickering from before, but a full-scale dimming in one section of the station, almost as if the shimmer had claimed that area. Harlow stayed by my side, monitoring me closely, reminding me not to leave. But the temptation clawed at my mind, like a living thing, a whisper in the back of my skull that said, "They need you, come." I fought every instinct, my hands trembling over the console, each breath shallow, each heartbeat loud in the oppressive silence. Hours dragged into an eternity. The shimmer's presence became overwhelming, stretching beyond hallways, beyond the viewport, making even standing still feel like an act of defiance. I tried to work on minor maintenance tasks, anything to keep my mind occupied, but the sound of someone calling me, the faint footsteps that weren't there, and the shifting shadows tested every bit of my resolve. Each time I resisted, a small part of me cracked, realizing how powerful it was, how it could manipulate everything, even our memories of the station itself. By dawn, we had learned another pattern. The shimmer didn't act until it had a chance to observe. It tested isolation first, waiting for someone to stray. The minute you leave your station, it's already inside you, bending perception, twisting air, shadows, and light. Singh whispered to me, "It doesn't just want us to move, it wants us to want to move." I understood then that the rule wasn't about physical safety alone. It was about protecting our minds, our senses, our ability to resist. That day, Harlow reinforced the rule with each of us, emphasizing its importance more than ever. She reminded us that the shimmer could imitate, manipulate, and test our resolve in countless ways, and that leaving our stations was a guaranteed invitation to death or disappearance. I stared at my console, listening to the faint hum of life support, feeling the weight of the rules pressing down on me. I realized that Rule 5 wasn't just a precaution, it was the thin line between sanity and surrender. As night fell again, I watched the monitors, my eyes fixed on the instruments, refusing to glance toward the hallways. I could feel the shimmer moving outside, pacing, testing, observing every tiny movement, every shiver, every breath. The whispering voices faded temporarily, but I knew it wasn't gone. It was always there, waiting, knowing that one lapse, one step beyond my station, would allow it to strike. And I knew, deep in my chest, that sooner or later, someone would falter. The shimmer's testing escalated by the 7th night, and the station's alarms became a constant torment. Each beep and siren pierced my ears, sending spikes of panic through my chest. Yet my instincts told me to stay calm and obey the rule. Rule 6. Never ignore the alarms, even if they seem false. I had learned through experience that the shimmer could mimic system malfunctions, trigger phantom alerts, and manipulate our senses to make us question reality. But ignoring them, even for a moment, was a gamble. none of us could survive. The first alarm of the night sounded from the external hull sensors, followed immediately by a subtle flicker of the corridor lights. My heart hammered as I ran to the console, checking readings, monitoring pressure levels, and tracking every sensor output. There was nothing. No breach, no anomaly, yet the sound persisted. The shimmer had learned to exploit our training, to make us react to imagined emergencies. Each false alert designed to fracture our discipline, to force a mistake, to lure someone away from safety. Harlow appeared beside me, her eyes wide with tension. "It's testing your response," she whispered, voice barely audible over the alarms. She reminded me to double-check the readings before acting, but even her presence wasn't enough to calm the rising dread. The shimmer's mimicry went beyond voices. It could manipulate lights, controls, even the hum of the station's core. Every alarm was a calculated psychological trap, preying on the fatigue, fear, and instinctive drive for survival that bound us all. Reyes nearly broke down. He swore the alarms were real, that the oxygen line was ruptured in the east corridor. He grabbed his toolkit and started toward the door, despite all our warnings. I lunged forward, grabbing his arm, shouting, "Rule 6, don't ignore it." The shimmer seemed to react instantly, slithering along the edges of the hallways, bending shadows in impossible ways. The moment he hesitated, I realized how close he had been to being drawn into its influence. A single lapse, a single step, and it could have claimed him entirely. Hours passed with alarms cycling intermittently, sometimes all at once, sometimes isolated to a single corridor or lab section. We became prisoners of anticipation, never resting, never allowing ourselves to ignore a single blip. Even when sensors reported no anomaly, we double-checked everything, knowing the shimmer could manipulate the system itself. Monroe paced beside the monitors, whispering, "It's learning from us, everything we do." I nodded silently, knowing she was right. Each alarm was a lesson, and every moment of hesitation was a test we couldn't fail. I remembered Carter's disappearance during the earlier missions. Logs described similar patterns, alarms that made the crew investigate phantom malfunctions, only to be met with silence or distorted reflections of themselves. It was the shimmer's signature, its method of separating, isolating, and exploiting our fear. By obeying Rule 6, we could survive longer, maintain our cohesion, and prevent the shimmer from claiming another crew member. But the longer the night dragged on, the more difficult it became to distinguish genuine alerts from its tricks. The shimmer's tactics evolved over the next few hours. Alarms would activate sequentially, mimicking real malfunctions and spreading panic across the station. Each time someone considered leaving their station, a pale distortion appeared, always at the edge of vision, an ethereal whisper floating along the corridors. We had to resist. We couldn't give it control. Every ignored alarm risked death, and the shimmer thrived on our doubt, fear, and impatience. By midnight, my nerves were frayed. The alarms became relentless, a constant assault on my senses, and I realized the shimmer had been observing my reactions closely. Every time I hesitated, it adjusted its patterns, creating new illusions and false alerts, testing my vigilance to the limit. Harlow reminded me, we survive by trusting the rule, not our senses. But trusting the rule became harder as the night dragged on, each second stretching into an eternity where one mistake could be final. Then came the breach alarm, the one that would have meant catastrophic failure in any other context. The monitors lit up in red, warning of extreme pressure fluctuations, but every reading contradicted the alert. My hand trembled over the console, yet I followed the rule and verified each sensor meticulously before reacting. The shimmer's presence pressed closer, more tangible than ever, a shadow moving along the corridors that seemed to feed on our hesitation. My breath came shallow, each inhale a countdown toward disaster. By dawn I was trembling, drenched in sweat, yet alive. The shimmer had receded temporarily, leaving behind a station that felt simultaneously empty and suffocating. Harlow and Singh exchanged silent looks, each understanding that the shimmer had tested us all and learned something new about our reactions. Rule 6 had held. Obeying the alarms, verifying reality before action, had kept us alive, but I also knew that its lessons were ongoing, that its patience and cunning would escalate, and that ignoring even a single warning in the future could be fatal. As I sit now at my station, the lights flickering ever so slightly, I understand that the shimmer is always watching. Every alarm, every distortion, every shadowed corner of the station is a potential trap. Rule 6 isn't just about the sensors or the lights. It's about training ourselves to resist panic, to trust procedure over instinct, and to maintain a fragile barrier against something that wants to dismantle our perception entirely. And I know deep in my bones that the next false alarm could decide who survives and who disappears forever. By the 8th night, the shimmer's manipulations became more tangible. Strange objects appeared in hallways that weren't there before, twisted fragments of machinery, glowing formations that pulsed like they were alive, and distorted shadows resembling tools left behind by previous crews. Rule 7. Never touch anything outside your designated area, no matter how strange it appears. I remembered Carter's logs and the grim outcomes of past crews. Each object wasn't merely a curiosity. It was a trap, a lure designed to pull us into the shimmer's domain, where the rules no longer applied. Harlow found a small iridescent crystal in the corner of the East Lab, hovering slightly above the floor. Its colors shifted hypnotically, and her hand twitched as if drawn to it. I snapped, grabbing her wrist. Rule 7, I yelled. Her eyes widened, panic replacing curiosity, and she pulled back instantly. The shimmer reacted, rippling across the station walls, bending light into shapes that mimicked human forms, taunting us with the consequences of touching even a single thing outside our zones. It wasn't just dangerous, it was sentient, learning from every lapse, every moment of hesitation. Reyes had nearly fallen for it too. A fragment of metal glimmered in the corridor between stations, reflecting the dim lights like a lure. His fingers brushed the surface, and I lunged to stop him, hearing his gasp echo down the metal halls. The shimmer flared instantly, a pale distortion that stretched along the walls, and the temperature dropped. The station itself seemed to react violently, as if aware that its rules were being tested. Every time someone moved toward an object, the shimmer grew stronger, closer, manipulating perception to make the forbidden irresistible. Hours passed, and the objects multiplied. I counted 6 new anomalies along the main corridor alone. Strange fragments, shimmering panels, bent tools, and glowing debris that pulsed unnaturally. Each seemed deliberately placed, as though the shimmer anticipated our movements and our instincts. I had to repeat the rule silently, over and over: do not touch, do not engage, do not look closer than necessary. Even the faintest curiosity was enough to bring it closer, to make its presence tangible, almost physical. Monroe whispered from her station, "It knows what we want, it knows what we need." I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. The shimmer didn't just manipulate objects. It manipulated desire, instincts, memories. Those fragments weren't just items. They were mirrors of our needs, illusions designed to trick us into breaking the rules. Every temptation was calculated, precise and fatal if yielded to. By refusing to touch, we preserved our minds and bodies, but the struggle grew harder with every passing hour. One particularly dangerous moment came when a fragment that looked like a long-lost tool floated at the edge of my vision. My hand itched to reach out, my muscles tensed with the urge to grasp it, to reclaim a familiar comfort in the alien abyss. I froze, repeating Rule 7 in my head. The shimmer reacted instantly, the corridor stretching in impossible ways, shadows twisting around me, and a distorted reflection of myself appeared, mimicking my hesitation. Every second I resisted felt like a lifetime, a test of willpower against an entity that didn't obey logic or physics. By midnight, we began noticing patterns in the shimmer's objects. They often mirrored items we had previously touched, fragments of previous crews' tools or reflective shards resembling faces of those long gone. I realized then that the shimmer wasn't just observing, it was cataloging, learning, and anticipating our weaknesses. Every time someone touched an object outside their designated area, it recorded the action, then adapted its methods to exploit the next lapse, the next instinctive reach. Harlow reminded us again, her voice calm but tense. The station is alive, in its own way. These objects, they are the shimmer's extensions. Touching them is inviting it inside. I obeyed silently, my fingers twitching over consoles, my curiosity screaming at me, but the rule became a mantra, a lifeline tethering me to survival. Monroe stayed nearby, eyes flicking nervously between objects and the shimmering shadows outside, knowing any slip could mean permanent disappearance. The night dragged on, each corridor and lab section a test of patience and restraint. The shimmer's influence pulsed subtly through the station, manipulating light, shadow, and sound to make each object appear vital, important, even necessary. I felt the temptation at my fingertips, every tool, every fragment calling to me, whispering that touching it would solve problems, grant control, or bring relief. But I didn't move. I couldn't move. The rule was the boundary between life and becoming just another echo of what had gone before. By the early morning hours, exhaustion made every object seem alive. Every reflection, every glint, every pulse of color threatened to draw me in. Reyes muttered under his breath, shaking, "It's too much. I can't stop seeing them." I gripped the console, forcing him to look away, to breathe, to repeat Rule 7 silently in his head. The shimmer's presence lingered like a cold shadow, moving with the station's air currents, testing us, learning which of us had the weakest will. And as I sit now recounting these events, I can still feel the shimmer's presence. The objects remain, hovering in corners, waiting for the moment one of us slips, one of us reaches beyond the boundary. The rule is clear: never touch anything outside your designated area. It isn't just guidance, it's a lifeline, a line drawn between the living and the vanished, and breaking it has consequences we are all too afraid to imagine. By the 9th night, the shimmer's presence had become suffocating, saturating the station in tension and unease. It was no longer enough to simply obey the internal rules. It had begun projecting voices, faint taps and vibrations against the hull, luring us to reach outside in desperation. Rule 8: never attempt to communicate through the hull with anyone outside. I remembered Monroe's whispered warnings from previous nights, and the logs of past missions. Anyone who had tried vanished, their screams swallowed by the pressure, their bodies never recovered. That night, a faint pounding echoed along the hull near the observation deck. It was rhythmic, insistent, almost like someone trying to communicate. My fingers twitched, my instincts screamed to respond, but the rule burned in my mind. Harlow's hand pressed against mine, her eyes wide and terrified, whispering, "Don't do it. Not now, not ever." The shimmer seemed to watch, learning from every flinch, every moment of doubt, amplifying our fear and testing our capacity for restraint. Reyes was the first to falter. A soft, distorted voice, calling his name, traveled through the metal walls. He leaned forward, hand raised as if to knock back, murmuring, I just need to know." I grabbed his wrist violently, shaking him awake from his trance. The shimmer pulsed at the hull, bending light and sound, as if it knew exactly how to mimic the missing crew, creating a desperate illusion no one could resist. Our own instincts had become the enemy, and breaking Rule 8 was far too tempting to dismiss casually. Hours passed with the hull emitting faint vibrations, the shimmer teasing us through sound alone. Monroe and Singh kept pace with me, every one of us whispering the rule like a prayer, repeating it mentally to resist the temptation. The shimmer thrived on isolation, anticipation, and desperation. Each knock, each vibration, each faintly recognizable voice was a test to see who could resist, and each near fall taught it more about our weaknesses. At one point, I heard Carter's voice clearly, crying from what I assumed was the trench outside. The sound was unmistakable, carrying the familiar panic in his tone. Every instinct screamed to respond, to reassure, to communicate. I closed my eyes briefly and felt a wave of vertigo, as if the station itself was bending to the shimmer's will. I opened them and glanced at the viewport. Empty, calm, yet oppressive. I realized then how little control we had. The shimmer didn't need to show itself fully. Its influence was everywhere, and obeying the rule was our only defense. Harlow reminded us of the logs where crews had succumbed to the shimmer's tricks. They had thought the voices were real, reached out, and vanished. The shimmer didn't just manipulate space. It manipulated perception, making the impossible seem real. Every time I pressed my palm against the metal during the vibrations, the shimmer pulsed as though aware of my touch, sending faint tremors through the station. We were trapped, not by walls or pressure, but by an intelligence that fed on doubt and desire. Reyes struggled most of all. Each vibration through the hull seemed to mirror someone he loved, someone he had lost or missed. The shimmer projected memories, whispered pleas, distorted echoes, making it impossible to discern reality from illusion. I held him down at the console, whispering Rule 8 repeatedly, forcing him to focus on the lights, the sensors, the instruments, anything that tethered him to the station and kept him from responding. One slip, one single touch, and we knew it would be gone forever. Time became irrelevant. The shimmer's vibrations and mimicry were relentless. Even with the interior lights on, every corner, every panel, every reflection felt alive. We had to reinforce the rule mentally, constantly reminding ourselves, never respond, never communicate, never falter. Every moment of hesitation gave the shimmer more knowledge, more leverage, more patience. The pressure in the station was no longer merely physical. It had become psychological, a suffocating weight pressing down on our minds. By the early hours, the hull's trembling ceased, but the memory of its vibrations lingered. We were exhausted, trembling, yet none of us had responded. We understood then that Rule 8 wasn't merely a warning, it was a survival mechanism. It separated the living from the vanished, tethered reality to our minds, and prevented the shimmer from exploiting our need to connect, our need for reassurance, and our desperation for contact. As dawn approached, the station felt temporarily calm, though the shimmer's presence was palpable, stretching beyond our vision and instruments. Each of us stared at the monitors, repeating Rule 8 silently, hands clenched, knuckles white. We knew it wasn't gone, it never was, and that the next night would bring new tests. The shimmer would continue, as patient and cunning as ever, watching, learning, waiting for even the briefest lapse. And I understood, with an icy certainty, that obeying this rule was one of the few things keeping us alive. By the 10th night, the shimmer's manipulations had escalated from subtle distortions to full-on psychological warfare. Every shadow, every flicker of light, every whisper of sound seemed designed to draw our attention, and the temptation to capture proof gnawed at all of us. Rule 9. Never attempt to record or photograph the shimmer. The warning had been explicit in Harlow's files, and past cruise logs made the consequences clear. Anyone who tried never returned, or worse, their recordings were found, corrupted beyond recognition, twisted into nightmares that weren't theirs. Reyes, despite all the warnings, almost reached for a camera when a faint, glowing silhouette appeared in the lab. His hand hovered, trembling, as if drawn by the need to document it, to prove it existed. I grabbed his arm, shoving him back toward the console. "Rule 9, I shouted, the desperation in my voice, matching the fear in my chest. The shimmer recoiled instantly, rippling across the walls and ceilings, like a shadow reacting to light, a predator aware of our every thought. The shimmer had begun appearing in forms almost recognizable, yet impossibly wrong. Glimpses of crew members, fragments of our own reflections, twisted into shapes that made our stomachs churn. Monroe whispered that it was feeding on our curiosity, learning from our reactions, and adapting. If we tried to record it, capture it, or even photograph it, it would know it would retaliate. The faintest click of a camera or a recorder could trigger its attention, drawing it closer, imprinting fear into our minds with the precision of a scalpel. Hours passed with the shimmer subtly manipulating reflections on the monitors. Every image we saw seemed distorted, warped, and unnatural. Even the instruments seemed to bend reality, displaying impossible shapes, objects that shouldn't exist in our field of vision. Harlow reminded us, voice low and firm, "You cannot document it, not a single image, not a single recording. It learns from everything, and once you try, it will follow you." I nodded silently, my hand shaking as it hovered over the recorder I had foolishly set nearby for testing. Reyes nearly faltered again when the shimmer mimicked Monroe's voice, coaxing him toward a camera in the observation bay. The temptation was nearly unbearable. The voice was precise, intimate, familiar. My heart pounded as I grabbed his arm once more, pulling him back. "Do not touch it. Do not record," I hissed, forcing him to focus on the rule instead of the illusion. The shimmer reacted, twisting shadows in ways that made the walls seem to breathe, testing our discipline, waiting for a mistake we couldn't afford to make. By midnight, we had noticed a pattern. The shimmer would grow more aggressive when we tried to observe it through any device. Even the smallest attempts at capturing its form caused it to flicker violently, light bending and stretching in impossible ways. It seemed to understand human behavior, anticipating our need for proof, and punishing those who gave in. Every reflection, every flicker, every attempted recording became a trap, one that could engulf the mind as easily as the body. Monroe whispered from her station, trembling, "It wants to be seen, but it can't be." Her words hung in the air, chilling and precise. The shimmer thrived on our curiosity, feeding off the impulse to document and the instinct to prove the impossible. Every time one of us hesitated, moved a hand toward a device, or even glanced at a recording, the station seemed to warp, lights bending and shadows flickering, as though reality itself was bending to its will. Hours blurred, the shimmer moving with patience, probing us, watching our every thought, even with the lights fully on. Every instrument, every reflection, every metallic surface seemed alive, responding to the faintest impulses to capture its presence. I repeated the rule silently, over and over: never record, never photograph, never tempt it. The shimmer was always patient, waiting for just one lapse, 1 second of curiosity, one flick of a finger toward a device, to strike. By early morning, the station fell quiet, though the shimmer remained present in every reflection, every corner, every shadow. The temptation to document its existence was unbearable, but obeying the rule kept us alive. Harlow reminded us that past crews had failed in this exact way, leaving behind recordings that had driven their colleagues insane. Rule 9 was no trivial precaution. It was survival, mental and physical, a boundary none of us could afford to cross. Even now, recounting the events, I can feel the shimmer lurking just beyond my field of vision. I avoid cameras, monitors, and even mirrors, knowing it can reach into the smallest openings. The rule is clear: never attempt to record or photograph the shimmer. It is patient, intelligent, and relentless, and disobedience is fatal. And as I write, I know that even the faintest lapse in vigilance could give it the edge it needs to claim another mind, another body, another soul. By the 11th night, exhaustion had seeped into every corner of our minds, and the shimmer's influence had intensified, twisting reality so subtly it was impossible to trust our senses. Panic whispered in the back of my skull, urging me to flee, to abandon the station and the suffocating darkness that seemed to pulse through every corridor. Rule 10: never attempt to escape the station without full team approval. The logs from previous missions were clear. Any solitary attempt to flee was met with disappearance. Or worse, the shimmer following relentlessly, exploiting the isolation to consume mind and body alike. Reyes nearly attempted it that night. He whispered that he had found a small breach hatch, one that might lead to the surface if timed correctly. My pulse jumped as I ran to intercept him, grabbing his shoulder and shaking him. Rule 10, his hissed desperation dripping from my voice. The shimmer reacted immediately. A subtle distortion across the hallways, shadows bending unnaturally, as though the station itself was aware of his intent. Attempting to leave without consensus was no longer a suggestion. It was an invitation for the shimmer to strike. The temptation to escape grew unbearable. 7 miles beneath the ocean's surface, trapped in metal and pressure, it felt impossible to ignore the urge to run. Yet the rule persisted in my mind like a lifeline. Harlow reminded us that any lone attempt would alert the shimmer instantly. It knows your fear, your isolation, your instincts, she whispered, voice trembling. Leave alone, and it follows. Leave together, and we might survive. The shimmer had learned our routines, our habits, and every impulse to flee was a test of discipline, patience, and unity. We stayed vigilant, monitoring the breach hatches, airlocks, and communications. The shimmer had become intelligent enough to exploit even minor lapses. Even when one of us reached for a panel to check an emergency exit, shadows twisted unnaturally, lights flickered, and distant echoes of our names reverberated through the station. I repeated Rule 10 silently, reminding myself that leaving alone was not a mistake to be risked. It was a death sentence. Every creak of metal, every hum of machinery, every distorted reflection became a test of our resolve. Hours dragged on, the shimmer manipulating reflections, lights and shadows to create a false sense of opportunity. Monroe's whispers echoed, "Maybe it's safe. Maybe we can just go." My jaw clenched as I shook my head. The shimmer thrived on doubt, feeding off each hesitation. Any solitary escape attempt would give it the perfect opening, a chance to isolate and consume, and we all understood it. The rule was a tether to reality, a boundary protecting both mind and body from the consequences of isolation. Reyes argued, his voice tight with panic, "We can't stay here forever. Something has to give." I grabbed his arm, refusing to let go. Not alone, not without full approval. "Rule 10, I shouted, feeling the shimmer's presence grow heavier, as though the station itself exhaled around us, testing our discipline. Even standing still required every ounce of willpower, every thought devoted to the rule. We couldn't afford to ignore it. 1 second of weakness could doom us all. By midnight, the station became a labyrinth of shadows and twisted corridors. The shimmer's influence pulsed through the walls and instruments, making every escape route seem accessible and yet impossible. Harlow monitored our movements closely, whispering reminders of Rule 10, reinforcing the necessity of unity. Any attempt to flee individually would be exploited immediately. The shimmer would isolate, confuse, and consume. Survival depended entirely on cohesion, patience, and adherence to the rule. Then came the false alarms, flickers in the lighting, pressure warnings, subtle mechanical vibrations, all engineered to provoke a panic-induced escape. Each one was a test, a temptation to abandon the station without consensus. I forced myself to breathe, focusing entirely on the instruments, the lights, the monitors. The shimmer's patience was infinite, its manipulation subtle, yet overwhelming. Every second of self-control reinforced the rule. Every lapse could be fatal. By the early hours of morning, the hallucinations had intensified. Shadows stretched impossibly long, reflections moved independently, and the faint whispers of crew members who weren't there echoed through the station. Yet none of us moved toward the exits. The shimmer, despite its intelligence and patience, could not force compliance unless we chose to break it ourselves. Rule 10 was not a suggestion. It was the line between survival and disappearance. As dawn approached, the station felt temporarily still, yet the shimmer's presence was undeniable. Every shadow, every reflection, every panel seemed alive with anticipation, testing our resolve, waiting for even the smallest hint of independent action. I repeated Rule 10 silently, over and over, knowing that obeying it was the only way to remain alive, to preserve our minds, and to survive the next test. The shimmer was patient, relentless, and infinitely intelligent. But as long as we followed the rule, there remained hope, fragile, tenuous, and dangerously precious. By the 12th night, exhaustion had broken the edges of our sanity, and the shimmer's presence pressed against us like an invisible tide. Every light flicker, every distorted reflection, every faint whisper was magnified by fatigue, urging even the most disciplined to succumb. Rule 11. Never close your eyes, no matter how safe it feels. I had ignored this warning once before, in a moment of weakness, and I could still feel the shimmer's tendrils crawling through my mind, reminding me of the cost of disobedience. Even when my eyelids burned from lack of sleep, even when the darkness of the station seemed to promise rest, I forced them open, counting each second, repeating the rule like a desperate mantra. The shimmer moved just beyond sight, a distortion in the corner of every monitor, every reflection, every metallic surface. Monroe whispered that it was everywhere, and closing my eyes, even for an instant, could allow it to merge with my perception, invade my mind, and claim me entirely. Hours passed like minutes. The shimmer's influence stretched through the station, bending shadows and light to create the illusion of corridors that weren't there, voices that weren't real, and eyes that followed our every move. I could hear Harlow and Singh whispering the rule over and over, keeping themselves awake, keeping themselves tethered to reality. I forced my hands to stay steady on the console, my mind screaming for just a second of relief, a moment of blindness that I knew could be my undoing. Ray's faltered for a heartbeat, and I saw it immediately. His eyelids drooped, the exhaustion too much to fight, and the shimmer reacted instantly. Shadows stretched along the hallways, reflecting distorted images of his face, whispering, coaxing, twisting him toward unconsciousness. I lunged, shaking him violently. Rule 11, don't close your eyes, I screamed, my voice echoing through the station. For a moment the shimmer pulsed in response, an almost tangible awareness of our discipline, a reminder of its intelligence and patience. The station itself seemed alive that night. Lights dimmed and brightened with rhythm, monitors flickered with impossible reflections, and the shadows twisted into faces I knew, faces I feared, faces I thought lost to the abyss. Every second of keeping my eyes open was agony, yet I knew that one slip, one tiny blink, could allow the shimmer to reach inside, manipulate memory, perception, even consciousness. Monroe and Harlow repeated the rules silently, each of us murmuring it over and over, as a shield against the creeping darkness. At one point, I caught my own reflection in the console's glass. The shimmer had mimicked my movements, slightly delayed, slightly off, almost perfectly human, yet wrong. My heart raced, and I fought the instinct to close my eyes, to escape the horror of seeing myself twisted. Every blink felt like temptation. Every shadow felt like a predator waiting for me to surrender. The shimmer had learned patience over countless hours, feeding off our fatigue, our fear, and the tiniest lapse in vigilance. Hours turned into a blur. We rotated near the observation deck, near the oxygen monitors, near every possible station, reminding one another to repeat the rule, to stay awake, to resist the urge for even a moment. The shimmer's whispers became almost melodic, coaxing, gentle, as if it could sense when desperation peaked. It didn't need to show itself fully, it only needed us to falter, and even for an instant, the consequences would be irreversible. By dawn we were trembling, minds stretched thin, eyes raw from sleepless vigilance. The shimmer seemed to pull back slightly, perhaps resting, perhaps observing, always testing. Harlow muttered, "It waits. It never leaves, but it tests us for weakness." I stared at the monitors, repeating Rule 11 silently, knowing that the moment I closed my eyes, I would be inviting it in. Every instinct screamed to sleep, to blink, to surrender, but the rule was survival, pure and absolute. And now, as I recount these events, I feel the shimmer everywhere, in the faint hum of the lights, in the subtle flicker of the monitors, in the warped reflections across the metal walls. I know that even as we survive these 12 nights, the final test looms. One careless blink, one tiny lapse in vigilance, and everything we have endured could vanish. We have survived by following 11 rules, but the shimmer waits patiently for the moment when our eyes close, and I don't know if anyone truly survives when that happens. If you enjoyed this story, like, share, and subscribe for more.